How do you react when your wife drains your twin daughter's college fund, vanishes with a younger man, and tells the world you'll figure it out somehow? What do you do when you think everything is lost, and your daughters look you in the eye and tell you not to worry because they've already taken care of it? I thought I was just a boring, middle-aged numbers guy. I didn't realize how much power quiet people can have until my wife's new life started crashing down around her. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Mark Ellison, and until a few months ago I thought my life was simple and stable. I am 50 years old, an actuary at an insurance company, and the father of twin girls who were getting ready for college. People who meet me tend to use the same words: careful, boring, safe. I never thought those words would become weapons used against me by my own wife. Every weekday morning looked the same. I woke up before everyone else, ground the coffee, and started breakfast. That particular morning, the one when everything began to fall apart, I stood at the stove flipping pancakes and glancing at the acceptance letters on the counter. Grace and Maya had both gotten into good universities. Their names were printed in bold at the top of each letter. I had run the numbers a dozen times. With the education trust I had built for them over 18 years, we were going to be fine. As the girls shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, I felt a quiet pride. I reminded them that we would go over the fees that evening and that I would start paying the enrollment deposits. They nodded and scrolled on their phones, mumbling that it felt unreal. Laura came in last. She looked perfect as always, hairstyled, nails done, already dressed like she was heading to some brunch I had not heard about. She glanced at the letters and made a light comment about how our girls were leaving and how we were getting old. I mentioned the trust again and how relieved I was that all the sacrifices had been worth it. Laura rolled her eyes in that small way she had developed over the last few years. She said I always made everything about budgets and funds, that I could not just enjoy a happy moment without turning it into a financial report. She added a joke about me being born with a calculator in my hand. The girls gave awkward smiles. They were used to this tone between us by now. On the drive to work, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. At a red light, I glanced down and saw a push notification from the bank app. It showed a large withdrawal from the education account. At first, my brain did not fully register it. I told myself it had to be a glitch, maybe some scheduled transfer I had set up years ago and forgotten to change. The number was big enough to make my stomach tighten, but I pushed the feeling down. I told myself I would log in later, that there was no need to panic. At the office, I tried to focus on mortality tables and risk models, the things that usually calm me. Numbers are logical. They do not lie. But every time I settled into work, my mind drifted back to that notification. I opened the bank website during lunch and logged into the education account. The balance was lower than I expected. Much lower. There were 2 transfers I did not recognize, both from the last week. I stared at the screen for a long time, refreshing it as if the numbers would change. I checked the transaction details and saw the recipient was an external account I did not recognize. It was linked to Laura's name. My first thought was that there had been some mix-up, maybe related to a card we shared for household expenses. I told myself she must have used the wrong account by mistake. I told myself I was overreacting, that we would talk at home and sort it out. This is what I do when something feels wrong. I look for a logical explanation. I give people the benefit of the doubt. That evening we were supposed to celebrate. The idea was to take the girls to a rooftop bar Laura loved, the one with city views and those fancy lights hanging on wires. Laura had suggested it the previous week, saying we should do something special, something more exciting than my usual takeout and movie. I agreed immediately. It felt nice that she wanted an event around our daughter's success. I tried not to think about the bank account as I drove the twins downtown. We arrived right on time, and I remember feeling weirdly hopeful as we rode the elevator up. Maybe I had misjudged everything. Maybe tonight would be happy and easy. When the elevator doors opened and we stepped out into the warm air and music, I started scanning for Laura. I expected her to be waiting at a table, waving at us. Instead, I saw her near the bar, standing close to a younger man I had only seen in photos. It took me a second to recognize him as Ryan, the personal trainer she had hired after saying she wanted to get in shape for her 40s. He was in his mid-30s, muscular, with that relaxed confidence some men carry like an accessory. He had one arm draped on the back of her chair. She was laughing at something he was saying. They looked like a couple at the start of a vacation, not like a wife and mother waiting to greet her family. Grace noticed first. She slowed beside me, and I felt her grip on my arm tighten. Maya stopped speaking mid-sentence. For a moment, we just stood there. I waited for Laura to see us and move away from him, to explain that it was not what it looked like. Instead, when she finally turned and spotted us, she did not step back. She just lifted her glass and waved lazily, as if we had interrupted something unimportant. We walked over, and she introduced Ryan in a casual way, as if I had not already seen his name pop up on her phone more than once. She said he was helping her with some new projects, both fitness and business. Ryan gave me a handshake that was a little too strong and greeted me like I was a client, not her husband. He made a comment about how lucky the girls were to have a dad who had planned so carefully, how not many parents thought ahead. I tried to respond politely, but the air felt thick and wrong. Then Laura shifted the whole conversation. She started talking loudly about change and about not wanting to live what she called a small life anymore. She spoke as if she was making a speech for the people around us as much as for us. She said she was tired of counting every dollar and letting fear run everything. She gestured between me and Ryan, pointing out how different we were. The word she used for me was safe. The word she used for him was exciting. The music hummed in the background, and I realized people near us had gone quiet. Some were looking over, half curious, half entertained. Laura said she had made a decision, that she was leaving with Ryan, that they were going to travel and build something new. She said she refused to wait until she was 60 to feel alive. She added that she had already taken what she considered her fair share from the college funds, and that I would manage somehow because that was what I did. I felt Grace step in front of me slightly, like she wanted to shield me from the words. Maya's eyes were glassy. I thought about arguing, about raising my voice and demanding she stop. But something inside me locked up. I could feel phones pointed in our direction. A couple of younger people at the bar were watching with that look people get when they see drama they might share later. Ryan smirked and made a comment about how someone needed to take risks and that holding too tight to old plans only made people miserable. He said he was going to help Laura make the most of her life. He laughed in a way that told me he saw me as a sad figure who would go home alone and update spreadsheets to cope. My cheeks burned, but my voice stayed low. I remember saying that we would talk privately later. Laura shook her head and told me there was nothing to discuss. Then she picked up her bag, linked her arm through Ryan's, and walked toward the elevator. The three of us stood there in the middle of the rooftop bar. The city lights glittered, and music started up again around us as if nothing important had happened. A server came over and asked gently if we still wanted our reservation. I realized then that the girls had not moved. Grace was staring at the floor. Maya was staring after the elevator. I told the server we would not be staying and led my daughters back inside. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up. No one spoke. In the parking garage, the concrete walls made everything echo. I kept hearing Laura's words in my head, the way she had talked about the fund like it was a pot of money she could dip into as a prize for leaving. My hands shook a little when I unlocked the car. We drove home in heavy silence. Night traffic slid past on either side, and the streetlights blurred in the windshield. I wanted to comfort the girls, to tell them I would fix it, but the truth was I did not know what fixing it would look like yet. I felt as if the ground under us had cracked open. Halfway across town, my phone buzzed again in the cup holder. I glanced down and saw another bank alert. A second withdrawal. Another large sum taken from the education account. At the same time, Grace's phone dinged in the back seat. She glanced at it and sucked in a breath. She said that someone had sent a video into the extended family group chat. It was already labeled with our name. A shaky recording from the rooftop bar filled her screen. Laura's voice carried over the noise as she announced that she had taken what she deserved from the college money and was leaving to live fully at last. We sat at a red light, the car idling, my phone showing a shrinking balance and my daughters watching their mother's declaration on repeat. In that moment, something inside me shifted from simple hurt to a cold, clear focus. I did not say anything yet. I just stared at the alert, listened to my girls breathing in the dark, and realized that this was not a glitch, not a mistake, not something I could smooth over with patience. When we got home that night, the house felt like a stranger. The same photos were on the walls, the same shoes by the door, but it was as if someone had taken the warmth out of the air. I locked the car, walked inside with the girls, and realized I had no idea what to say first. My brain was still trying to catch up with the last few hours. Grace and Maya went straight to the living room and sat on the couch like they had run out of energy. I stood in the doorway for a second, listening to the fridge hum in the background and the faint sound of the video still playing on someone's phone. My first instinct was to apologize. That is who I am. I want to fix things even when I am not the one who broke them. I told them I was sorry they had to see their mother like that, and that I was sorry about the college fund. My voice sounded thin and tired in my own ears. I said I had failed them. Grace looked up sharply when she heard that. She told me I had not failed anyone, that I had done everything I could for years. Maya wiped her face and said Laura was the one making choices, not me. They spoke quietly, but there was a firmness in their tone I had not noticed before. We sat there for a long time. At some point, I went to make tea just to have something to do with my hands. As the kettle boiled, my mind drifted back, past the bar, past the argument, to the first time I saw Laura. It was almost painful how different things had been. I met her at a small downtown cafe more than 20 years earlier. She was working as a server and taking night classes in event management. I was a young actuary then, freshly hired, still getting used to wearing a tie every day. I remember she joked that my tie looked too serious for someone my age. She said I looked like I was already worried about retirement instead of enjoying my 20s. I told her I liked knowing where things were going, and she laughed and said she wished she had that kind of security. Back then, she liked that about me. She said she had grown up with chaos and was tired of never knowing if the rent would be paid. She said my careful nature felt safe. We ate cheap dinners together after her shifts and talked about the future. She loved to dream aloud about the life she wanted. A house, kids, holidays where we did not check our bank balance every 5 minutes. I told her I would do everything I could to make that life real. I meant it. When the twins were born, that promise turned into numbers and plans. I spent nights rocking babies with one arm and reading about education accounts with the other. When they were a few months old, I met Angela, the lawyer, through a coworker. She helped me draw up the first trust documents. I was probably annoying, asking 1,000 questions about clauses and protections. Angela joked that I was her only client who wanted more restrictions instead of fewer. But I knew two things very clearly. I wanted Grace and Maya to have options, and I did not want their future to depend on anyone's mood, not even my own. For many years, Laura was proud of that. With friends, she would say she had married a man who might not be exciting, but who would always make sure the bills were paid and the kids had a college fund. She would pat my shoulder and call me her rock. I knew she sometimes wanted more fun and spontaneity than I could give, but she still seemed to respect the stability. The shift happened slowly. It did not start with Ryan. It started with little comments at gatherings. She would tell people I was married to my spreadsheets. She would say things like that I did not know how to relax, that I acted like every dinner out was going to bankrupt us. At first, she said it with a smile and people laughed. I tried to laugh too. I told myself it was harmless. Then social media became a bigger part of her life. Her event planning work grew, and she started posting pictures of parties, styled tables, and hotel lobbies. She liked getting likes and comments. When her follower count passed 10,000, she made a big deal about it. She started comparing our everyday life to the pictures she saw online. She would scroll through images of people on yachts or in luxury resorts and say that some people knew how to live while others just calculated. The first time she really embarrassed me in front of others was at a friend's birthday party. Everyone was crowded in a backyard with music playing. Someone asked how we had managed to save for 2 kids' college without going crazy. I started to explain my system, that I had set up automatic transfers from every paycheck since the twins were born. Before I could finish, Laura cut in. She said people should not listen to me unless they wanted to live in fear their whole lives. She called me her walking calculator and said I had 2 settings, anxious and very anxious. Everyone laughed, including her. I tried to smile, but something in my chest tightened. After that, it became a pattern. Anytime I raised a concern about money, even small things like a last-minute weekend trip, she would roll her eyes and say she did not want our daughters to grow up afraid to spend $1. She said she had spent her whole childhood worrying about bills and refused to do that again. I understood that. I never wanted to go back to the kind of insecurity she had known. But there is a difference between security and denial. She stopped seeing that line. Then she met Ryan at the gym. At first, he was just the trainer. She said she liked that he pushed her hard and did not let her hide. She started talking about him at dinner, repeating his slogans about taking risks and not letting fear win. She said he had opened her eyes to how small our life was. She did not say it in a cruel tone at first, just as an observation. But whenever she said small, she looked at me. I remember one night when the twins were studying at the table and Laura came home glowing from a new class. She said Ryan had told her that stability was just another prison if it kept you from living. She said that maybe our careful planning had become a cage. She said she would rather regret things she did than things she never tried. Grace and Maya exchanged a quick look and then bent over their books. They were not stupid. They heard every word. In the months before the rooftop bar, the jokes shifted into open criticism. If I suggested we slow down on some purchase, she would say she was tired of being controlled by my spreadsheets. She told friends she felt like she had 3 kids instead of 2, because she had to fight me to do anything fun. She stopped coming to financial meetings about the girls' scholarships and grants. She said that was my territory and that it bored her. Sitting in the living room with the twins that night after the bar, all those small cuts finally felt like they were connected. Laura had not suddenly changed. She had just taken what she had been saying for years to its final point. In her mind, the college fund was not a trust I had built for our daughters. It was a resource trapped in a cage of my rules, a pile of money tied up in my fear. I told the girls again that I did not know how we would handle tuition now. I said I would pick up extra work if I had to, that I would sell the car or move to a smaller place. Grace shook her head. She told me to stop talking like that. She explained that a few weeks before, she had noticed something odd on a bank email that came through on the shared family computer. A login from a new device, a transfer alert. She said at first she thought it was me moving things around, but then she saw Laura's email on a screen one day and realized their mother was looking at the education account more often than usual. Grace said she had printed out the full account history and brought it to Maya. Together, they had gone through the statements, highlighting anything that looked strange. They had seen a pattern of small test withdrawals followed by larger ones. They had also noticed that some of the transfers were happening late at night from Laura's phone. They were not experts, but they were not blind either. Maya said that when it became clear this was not an innocent mistake, they started gathering everything. They downloaded PDFs of every statement. They took screenshots of the transaction details. They saved emails about password changes. They knew I was under a lot of stress at work during that time and did not want to come to me until they were sure. They were waiting for proof. Hearing my daughters talk like that, methodical and calm, was both heartbreaking and strangely reassuring. I asked them why they had not told me sooner. Maya said they had hoped it would stop. Grace said they did not want to accuse their mother if there was another explanation. Then she added that, after seeing what happened at the bar, there was no doubt anymore. She said that this was why, when they told me not to worry, they meant it. They had already done more than I realized. They both looked tired, but determined. Grace said they had already contacted the bank earlier that day through the messaging system and asked to speak with someone about possible unauthorized use of an education account. She said a manager had replied and offered a time to talk the next afternoon. His name was Daniel. They had put the appointment on the calendar before we even drove to the bar. Later that night, after they went to their room, I walked past their door and saw their laptop open on the bed. On the screen, I could see a folder titled with the name of the college fund and the word transfers. Beside it, there were printed pages stacked neatly, rows of numbers and dates highlighted in yellow. My girls had been building their own case while I was trying to pretend everything was normal. On the desk, there was a sticky note with a time and the name Daniel Bank. Seeing that small, careful handwriting, I felt something new mix with my fear. It was not anger yet. It was something quieter, harder. The next day, we were not just going to talk about feelings. We were going to start dealing with facts. The next morning, I woke up with the same heavy feeling in my chest. For a second, I forgot why. The way you forget a bad dream when you first open your eyes. Then the memory slid back in. The rooftop bar, Laura's speech, the bank alerts. I lay there staring at the ceiling and thought that I had to move, one step at a time, because the twins were depending on me. When I went into the kitchen, Grace and Maya were already dressed. They sat at the table with their backpacks beside them. There were dark circles under their eyes, but they looked strangely focused. Grace reminded me that she had an appointment at the university that day to finalize some paperwork for her admission. She had planned to pay the enrollment deposit from the education account. She asked if I still wanted to come. I could tell she was ready to manage it alone if I could not face it. I told her that I was coming. I said it in a steady voice, even though my stomach turned at the thought of seeing a number on a screen where there should have been security. Maya said she would stay home and organize all the statements they had printed. She said she wanted everything in order for the bank meeting with Daniel later. I nodded and tried to push away the guilt that my children were now talking like adults in a damage control meeting. On the drive to the campus, Grace kept looking out the window. I could tell she was thinking hard. I wanted to tell her that it would be all right, but the truth was I did not know yet what that meant. Instead, I told her that whatever happened with the money, I would find a way to support her education. I said that this disaster was not her fault. She listened and then told me that she believed me, but that she also believed in facts, and that was why we were going to the office. The university's financial aid and admissions office was busy when we arrived. The waiting area was filled with students and parents holding folders and envelopes. There was a buzz of excitement in the air. For most of them, this was a happy, hopeful process. I could feel Grace shrinking slightly as we walked to the front desk. She gave her name, and a staff member asked us to sit until someone could see us. We sat side by side in plastic chairs. Posters about scholarships and work-study programs covered the walls. A family across from us was laughing about dorm decorations. I thought about how this visit was supposed to feel like that for us, too. Instead, I was fighting the urge to stand up and walk out. After a few minutes, a woman in a university polo shirt called Grace's name. We followed her into a small office with a computer and 2 chairs. The staff member smiled and asked Grace about her chosen major, then pulled up her file on the screen. She explained that they just needed to confirm the deposit from the education account and that then everything would be ready. Grace nodded and looked at me. My hands felt cold. The woman typed some commands, then frowned slightly. She tried again. After a moment, she turned the screen a little away, as if to shield it from us. She told us in a careful voice that the linked education account showed a much lower balance than expected, and that there were recent large withdrawals. She added that the payment attempt had been declined. She used formal phrases, but the meaning was simple. The money was not there. Grace's face went pale, and I felt the blood rush to my ears. I could sense other people moving outside the door, and I hated that we were having this conversation in a place where anyone might walk by. The staff member asked if there might have been a mistake, another account, a recent change we had forgotten to report. She spoke kindly, but she also needed an answer. I made myself breathe slowly and told her that there must be some confusion and that we would check with our bank. I asked her not to cancel Grace's place over this, and she said they would hold the spot for a short time while we sorted out the payment. Grace nodded, eyes fixed on the carpet. As we walked back through the waiting area, I could feel people's eyes on us. Maybe no one was actually looking, maybe it was just in my head, but the feeling was there, that we were the ones who could not pay, the ones who did not have it together. Grace clutched the folder against her chest like it was a shield. When we reached the car, she got in quietly and stared straight ahead. On the drive home, she finally spoke. She said that this was not something we could ignore anymore. She said that her mother had not just hurt our feelings, she had crossed a line. I agreed. I could feel something shift inside me again, sharper this time. The pain was still there, but it was wrapped in a new layer of clarity. We were done hoping this would fix itself. Back at home, Maya met us at the door. She had spread papers across the dining table. There were bank statements, screenshots, and a small notebook with dates and notes. She had also found printouts of some of Laura's emails related to the account, ones that mentioned balances and transfers. She looked like a junior analyst preparing a report. I realized that my daughters had absorbed more from watching me work over the years than I had thought. We sat together and went through everything slowly. The girls explained how they had traced the steps of each withdrawal. They had laid out the timeline from the first small test transfer to the large, bold moves of the last week. They had even matched some of the dates to photos Laura had posted online, traveling, shopping, sitting on a balcony with Ryan and holding a glass in her hand. It was like watching a story unfold, but not the kind of story anyone wants. Though, at one point, Grace asked if there was anything in the original trust that could help. She remembered that I had been very detailed when I set it up. I told her that there were protections, but that I needed to check the exact language. Saying those words made me think of the safe in the garage. I keep certain things there. Old documents, a few sentimental items, and the physical copies of the trust papers. For years, I had told myself that it was just a sensible backup in case something happened to the digital files. I had never really imagined that I would open that safe in a moment like this. That evening, I went into the garage alone at first. The garage smelled of oil and dust. My small workbench sat against one wall, tools hanging in neat rows above it. In the corner stood a gray metal cabinet with a lock, and beside it, a heavy box bolted to the floor. The safe. I knelt, entered the code with fingers that trembled only slightly, and heard the familiar click. Inside were folders labeled with dates and names. One of them had the twins' names written across the front in my handwriting. I took the folder out and held it for a second, feeling the weight of the years in it. I did not open it right away. Just holding it reminded me of the day I had signed those papers, how proud and focused I had felt. Angela had sat across from me then, going line by line, making sure I understood what each clause meant. She had insisted that I not rush, that clarity at the beginning prevented pain later. I heard footsteps behind me. Grace and Maya had followed me silently into the garage. They saw the folder in my hands and asked if that was the trust. I said that it was. I told them that I was not ready to read it out loud yet, not because I was afraid of what was in it, but because I wanted to review every word in a calm state, not in a rush of anger. I explained that the details would matter. The girls nodded. They understood the language of details. Grace then held up a small object between her fingers. It was a USB drive. She said they had saved all the digital records on it, including transaction logs, bank emails, and screenshots. She added that if we needed to show anything to anyone, it would be better to have it all in one place. I looked at the little metal device and felt again that mixture of sorrow and pride. My quiet habits had become their instincts. We went back inside and cleared a space on the kitchen table. I set the folder down next to the stack of statements. The house was very still. Even the normal sounds of traffic outside seemed far away. I realized we were standing at a crossroads. One path was the old one, where I tried to resolve things through private talks and emotional appeals, hoping that reason would win. The other path was different. It involved rules and systems and stepping into a role I usually avoided, that of someone who insists on consequences. For most of my life, I have been the person who smooths things over. In school, in my job, in my marriage, I would rather stay late and quietly fix the problem than confront the person who caused it. That night, staring at the trust folder and the USB drive, I understood that this habit had kept peace on the surface while deeper damage formed underneath. Laura had counted on that. She believed I would grieve and then find a way to pay for everything anyway, because that was what I always did. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. My thumb hovered over Angela's name. It had been a while since we spoke. Most of our contact had been in those early years when the twins were small and I was setting up the trust. I knew that calling her would start something formal. It would turn this situation into a matter with files and case numbers, not just hurt feelings. Grace watched me and asked gently if I was going to call the lawyer. Maya said that, in her view, what their mother had done was not just a family argument, but a breach of something bigger. They both said that they would support whatever I decided. I realized then that they were not asking me to be calm or to keep the peace. They were asking me to protect them. I pressed the call button. As the phone rang, I felt strangely steady. The hurt was still there, but it had a frame around it now. I told myself that I was not doing this to punish anyone. I was doing it to correct something that had gone badly wrong. I heard Angela's voice answer on the other end, clear and professional. I took a deep breath and started to tell her what had happened, while on the table in front of me lay the unopened trust folder and a small USB drive that, together, would change everything. Angela did not react the way I feared when I told her what had happened. On the phone, she listened without interrupting. I could hear her taking notes. When I finished, she said in a calm, steady tone that this was serious, but not hopeless. She said we needed to sit down with everything in front of us and go through it carefully. She suggested that I bring the trust folder, all the statements, and the girls, if they wanted to be involved. She gave me a time for the next afternoon at her office. The day before that meeting felt strangely long and short at the same time. At work, I went through the motions. I opened files, answered emails, and tried to look normal. Inside, my thoughts kept circling around the same points. I remembered every comment Laura had made about being trapped by my planning. I also remembered how I had insisted, almost stubbornly, on certain limits when we set up the trust. At the time, Laura had teased me for overdoing it. Now, I wondered if those same limits would be the only reason we still had any leverage. In small breaks between tasks, I checked Laura's social media. It was a strange habit, but I could not help it. There she was in my phone screen, sitting on a balcony with Ryan, the city lights behind them, a glass in hand. In another photo, she stood in a boutique holding shopping bags. Her captions talked about fresh starts and living for yourself. None of the posts mentioned that the money for this new life had been meant for her daughter's education. Maya later told me she had saved all those posts in a hidden folder. When the time came for our meeting with Angela, I left work early and drove home to pick up Grace and Maya. They had helped me pack everything into a large bag, the trust folder from the safe, the printed statements, and the USB drive. The girls looked nervous but focused. I told them they could wait outside if it felt too heavy, but they both said they wanted to be in the room. They said this was about them too. Angela's office was in a quiet building with frosted glass doors and dark wood trim. Inside, her space was neat and simple. There were framed certificates on the walls and a small plant on a shelf. She greeted us with a professional warmth and invited us to sit around a conference table. When she saw the size of the stack we had brought, she gave a small nod, as if saying that we had done the right thing by coming prepared. She asked me to start from the beginning. I told her about setting up the trust when the twins were born, about how Laura and I had been then, about my desire to protect the girls' future. I explained how things had changed over the years, and I described the recent events step by step, the bank alerts, the rooftop bar, the university office. The girls added details I had missed, like the exact dates they saw suspicious logins and the way Laura had spoken to them at the condo. Angela listened with her hands folded on the table. When we finished, she opened the trust folder and began reading. She did not rush. Her eyes moved line by line, sometimes pausing to underline a phrase or make a note on a yellow pad. She asked me to confirm small details, like who had signed where and who had been present. It was strange, hearing her discuss a document that represented so many years of quiet hope. After a while, she looked up and said that the structure we had put in place was much stronger than many she had seen. She reminded me that I was the grantor and primary trustee. Laura, she said, had been added as an agent with limited authority to make disbursements for educational purposes only. Angela pointed to a section that, she explained, dealt with misuse or diversion of funds. She did not read it word for word. She only summarized its effect. If an agent used money for non-educational purposes or in coordination with an outside party for personal gain, there were consequences built in. Angela then asked to see the bank records. Grace slid the stack of statements across the table, and Maya plugged the USB drive into Angela's laptop. Together, we went through the recent months. Transfers appeared on the screen, lines of numbers with dates beside them. Angela asked the girls to explain how they had discovered each one. She praised them for their careful work and told them that this kind of documentation would be very important. She said that, from what she saw, Laura had not simply made an honest mistake. The pattern indicated deliberate withdrawals, likely with Ryan's help, into accounts that had nothing to do with tuition or school expenses. Angela's expression stayed professional, but there was a hardness in her voice when she said this. She said that, legally, this could be considered a breach of duty, and possibly even something the bank's fraud department would want to review. The name on our bank manager's email signature came up when we mentioned the appointment the girls had made. Angela recognized the bank and said she had dealt with them before. She suggested that we go ahead with the meeting, present what we had, and formally raise concerns about unauthorized use of the education account. She told us that the bank had its own procedures for freezing accounts and reviewing suspicious activity, and that any findings from them would support whatever legal steps we might take. The next day, we went to see Daniel at the bank branch. The building was bright and cold, with polished floors and quiet music playing. Daniel met us in a small glass-walled office. He was in his 40s, with a careful, measured way of speaking that reminded me a little of my own work voice. He had already pulled up the account on his screen. He asked us to explain what we believed had happened. I laid out the situation plainly, trying to keep emotion out of it. Grace and Maya added what they had seen, and we handed over the printed statements and a list of transfers. Daniel frowned as he scrolled through the records. He could see the large withdrawals to an external account linked to Laura and apparently to Ryan. He commented that the pattern did not match normal education expenses. He said the bank took this kind of thing seriously, especially where a trust and named beneficiaries were concerned. Daniel explained that he would forward the information to the bank's fraud and compliance team. He said that they had the authority to flag the external account, freeze certain transactions, and even attempt to reverse recent transfers if they were found to be improper. He warned us that the process might take some time and that he could not promise outcomes yet, but he sounded confident that our concerns were valid. He asked for Angela's contact details so the bank's legal department could coordinate with her if needed. Walking out of the bank, I felt a small shift in my posture. For the first time since this started, I was not just reacting. We were moving within a system that recognized what had been done as wrong. It did not fix the hurt, but it framed it in a way that made sense to me. There would be logs, reports, and eventually decisions. The following evenings were spent in the garage and kitchen, turning our loose pile of pain into structured information. Grace created a timeline on a large sheet of paper, marking each significant date. Maya printed screenshots of Laura's social media posts, noting the days they were uploaded, then matched them with the bank transfers. We saw the pattern clearly: a withdrawal, then a picture from a new restaurant or a trip, often with captions about freedom and finally investing in herself. I sorted older documents, making sure we had every version of the trust and any amendments. I found a file with notes from a separate meeting with Angela years ago when my parents left a small inheritance for the girls. At the time, we had discussed adding extra layers of protection. I had almost forgotten those details, but now they felt important. I did not say much about them to the girls yet. I just added the file to the growing stack. Angela called a few days later to say she had filed initial paperwork to secure the remaining trust assets and to notify Laura officially that there were questions about her use of the funds. She told me that, because of the nature of the trust and the involvement of the bank, there would be a mandatory mediation session before anything more aggressive happened in court. She said this was not a bad thing. Mediation meant everyone would have to sit in the same room and face the facts laid out clearly. At home, the girls and I tried to live normal days around this slow, quiet work. I still went to the office, still cooked dinner, still asked about their homework, but underneath every small routine was the knowledge that something large was moving now, something that did not depend on Laura's moods or my patience. I noticed that the girls checked their phones less for their mother's posts and more for messages from the bank or Angela. One afternoon, as I walked back from the community mailbox with the usual stack of flyers and bills, a thicker envelope stood out. It was addressed to me, with the return address of a mediation center and the court printed in neat letters at the top. My fingers tightened around it. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the weight of it before I even opened it. Inside the house, I placed the other mail on the counter and slid a finger under the flap of the thick envelope. The paper inside was smooth and official. At the top was a date and time, a room number, and a list of names. Mine, Laura's, our attorneys, and a neutral mediator. The document stated that we were required to attend a financial mediation regarding the education trust and related accounts. As I read those lines, I felt the house around me come into sharper focus. The fridge, the table, the chairs, the photos on the wall with Laura smiling in them. For years I had tried to keep everything together in this space by bending and absorbing every blow. Now, on a plain sheet of white paper, was the first sign that I would not be the only one answering questions anymore. The mediation notice stayed on the kitchen table for the rest of the evening, and every time I walked past it, I felt something different. Not dread, not panic, something steadier. A sense that we had moved from chaos into structure. There was a process now, a time, a place, a requirement that everyone show up and face what had been done. Grace and Maya hovered near the table too. They didn't touch the paper, but I could tell they kept rereading the details in their minds. They asked me what mediation would be like. I explained that it was not a courtroom, not a shouting match, just a session where a neutral person guides both parties through financial issues. I told them that the mediator would be trained to keep things calm and factual. Maya asked if Laura would have to be there. I said yes. Grace looked down at her hands and nodded. That night, the girls went to their room early. I stayed in the kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold before I even drank from it. The trust folder sat beside me, unopened. I knew I could review it again, but Angela had told me not to drown myself in the paperwork. She said she would handle the fine details. My job, she said, was to stay steady and rested. It was strange receiving that kind of instruction. I had spent my whole life being the one who took on extra weight so others could breathe. Now I was being told to put some of that weight down. I spent the next few days preparing in small, meaningful steps. At work, during lunch breaks, I wrote out questions I thought the mediator might ask. I practiced short answers in my head. I made sure I understood the timeline the girls had created. I reviewed the bank statements enough times to recognize the patterns without needing to look at the paper. At home, we sat together each night. Not to talk about the case, at least not always. Sometimes we just ate in silence. Sometimes the girls watched old movies with me. Sometimes we discussed what their first year of college might be like if things turned out the way we hoped. These small moments were our way of reminding ourselves that the world was still moving forward, even if one piece of it had broken. A few days before the mediation, Grace hesitated at my office door while I was paying bills. I asked what was wrong. She said she had been thinking a lot about the day she and Maya visited Laura at her rental condo, the day they realized without any doubt that their mother had no intention of returning anything she had taken. Maya came in behind her and sat on the floor, pulling her knees up under her chin. She said she had been trying not to think about it, but it kept replaying in her mind. They asked if they could tell me everything about that visit, not just the part they had mentioned earlier. I told them yes. Whatever they needed to say, I wanted to hear. Grace started first. She explained that she and Maya had gone to see Laura partly out of worry and partly out of hope. They thought maybe they could reason with her, maybe convince her to reconsider what she was doing. They had messaged her asking if she had time to talk, and she had replied happily, telling them to come by the condo. When they arrived, Laura opened the door in new clothes, with music playing in the background and the smell of takeout from a trendy restaurant filling the room. Ryan was there too, leaning back on the couch with his feet up. He greeted the girls like they were old friends, not children whose college fund he was helping drain. Grace said she felt sick the moment she stepped inside. Laura gave them a loud, excited tour of the condo. She talked about how free she felt, how refreshed she was, how she was finally taking care of herself. She said she was planning to travel more with Ryan, maybe even start a small business. She made it sound like she had discovered some secret to happiness that the rest of us were too scared to try. The girls tried to bring up the money, gently at first. Maya told me she had asked if the withdrawals were temporary, if Laura was planning to reimburse the fund. Laura waved her hand dismissively and said that stepping into a new life required seed capital. She said she had earned it emotionally after years of dealing with my caution and fear. She told the girls they should be excited for her. Grace told her that the money was for college. Laura said she knew that, but insisted that the girls were smart enough to get scholarships or loans. She said it was better for them to learn independence anyway. She promised she might help them later if they supported her choices now, but she did not say how or when. She said it in the tone of someone offering a gift, not returning what she had taken. Ryan then added that growth requires bold moves. He said they were investing the money into opportunities that would pay off for everyone eventually. He smiled like he had said something profound. Grace wanted to scream, but she held it in. Maya wanted to walk out, but she stayed because she didn't want Grace to face it alone. When the girls finished telling me this, the house felt heavier. They sat with me in silence for a long moment. Then Grace said something that stayed with me. "Dad, she doesn't think she did anything wrong. She thinks you'll pick up the pieces because you always do. She thinks the world will adjust itself around her choices." Listening to them, I realized something important. Laura wasn't planning to argue or negotiate at mediation. She was planning to walk in confident, certain that I would fold under pressure. She believed the same story she had repeated for years, that I was harmless, soft, unable to fight back. The next morning, I went to my office at the insurance company and asked my boss, Principal Harris, if I could speak with him privately. He closed the door and sat across from me. I respect him more than most people. He has a calm, fair way of seeing things. I told him I had to take time off for mediation. He listened quietly, then said he had seen something was weighing on me. When I told him the outline of the situation, he didn't give advice or lecture me. He just nodded and told me something simple. People who think quiet means weak always learn the truth the hard way. He said I had the kind of patience that becomes strength when the moment arrives. His words stayed with me for the rest of the day. That night, Angela scheduled a video call with us to go over what to expect. She appeared on the screen with her glasses on and a stack of papers beside her. She reminded us that mediation was not about emotion or speeches. It was about facts and documents. She explained the order in which the mediator would ask questions, the way the evidence would be presented, and what we should do if Laura or Ryan tried to derail the conversation. She told the girls they didn't have to speak unless the mediator asked them directly, but that they were allowed to read a prepared statement if they wanted. Grace nodded immediately. Maya hesitated, then said she would speak too, even if it was only a few sentences. Angela looked at me through the screen and said, "You've done everything you need to do. Now you let the system work." I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up in the middle of the night. The morning of mediation arrived quietly. The sky outside our windows was gray, and the air felt cool. I put on a simple button-down shirt and straightened the collar twice before leaving my room. Grace wore a navy sweater. Maya chose a white blouse. They both looked older than their 18 years, not because of the clothes, but because of everything they had carried recently. We drove downtown without speaking much. The courthouse stood tall and pale against the cloudy sky. People moved in and out through the glass doors, some holding folders, others holding their breath. Inside, the lobby was wide and echoed with footsteps. I felt the girls move closer to me as we walked through security. Angela was waiting near a bench, holding a slim binder. She smiled gently at the girls and shook my hand. She told us the room was reserved for 10 o'clock and that we were right on time. I felt my pulse slow a little just from having her there. A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Laura stepped out with Ryan beside her. Laura wore a tailored coat and heels. Ryan wore a tight black shirt under a blazer, as if he was attending a casual photo shoot instead of a legal proceeding. They spotted us immediately. Laura's expression flickered, surprise, maybe, or irritation, but then she smiled broadly and walked toward us. She acted as if this was a social visit, greeting the girls warmly and telling them they looked beautiful. Grace looked away. Maya gave a brief nod. Ryan stood with his hands in his pockets, smiling in a way that felt rehearsed. He told me he hoped we could find a balanced solution today. He said he wanted to avoid drama. I said nothing. Angela stepped forward slightly, a subtle, protective gesture. A clerk walked into the lobby and called my name. The sound of it cut through everything else. Conversations paused. Someone dropped a pen. My daughters straightened beside me. We followed the clerk toward a hallway, the girls matching my steps, Angela carrying the binder, Laura adjusting her coat, Ryan checking his reflection in a glass panel. Just before we entered the mediation room, Angela set the binder on the table outside, flipped it open, and showed me the first page. Neatly organized sections, colored tabs, clear labels. "You're ready," she said. I nodded. I felt the weight of every year, every sacrifice, every quiet moment where I had chosen patience. But I also felt something new. A sense that this time, silence would not protect the people who had broken what they were given. The door opened, and we stepped inside. The mediation room was smaller than I expected. There was a long table in the middle, a pitcher of water, a box of tissues, and a clock on the wall ticking too loudly. The mediator sat at one end, a woman in her early 60s with calm eyes and a notebook. She introduced herself and explained how the session would go. Her voice was steady and practiced, like she had seen every kind of family disaster pass through this room. Angela sat beside me with the binder. Grace and Maya were on my other side. Laura sat across from me with Ryan to her right and their lawyer, a man in a dark suit, to her left. He had the confident posture of someone who expected to win. The mediator started by asking Laura's lawyer to explain why they were there. He leaned forward and said that his client believed I was using the education funds to punish her for leaving the marriage, that I had seized control of money that should be shared, and that the girl's future was being used as a weapon in a personal conflict. He described me as rigid, controlling, and unwilling to accept change. While he spoke, Laura nodded along. Ryan sat with his hands folded, eyes moving between the mediator and me, as if he was watching a show he already knew the ending of. When the lawyer finished, the mediator turned to Angela and asked for our side. Angela did not raise her voice or rush. She opened the binder to the first section and began by describing how the trust had been set up 18 years earlier. She explained that I was the grantor and primary trustee, that the trust was funded entirely with my income and an inheritance from my parents, and that its stated purpose was to pay for Grace and Maya's education. Then she slid a document across the table toward the mediator. It was the original trust agreement. For the first time, someone other than Angela and me read the exact clauses that had been sitting in my safe all these years. The mediator scanned the pages, then paused at a section Angela had marked with a yellow tab. Angela summarized it aloud. In simple terms, it said that Laura was named as a limited-use agent with permission to request disbursements for direct educational expenses only: tuition, books, housing. It also said that any use of funds for non-educational purposes, or any transfer done in coordination with a third party for personal gain, would result in that agent's immediate removal and in full control reverting to the trustee and the beneficiaries. The mediator asked if Laura had been made aware of these terms when she signed. Angela slid a signature page forward. Laura's name was there, next to mine, next to Angela's. As witness, the mediator looked up and asked Laura's lawyer if there was any dispute about that. He hesitated, then said that Laura had not understood all the legal language at the time. Angela did not argue. She simply moved to the next section of the binder. This one contained the bank statements and a timeline. She showed how, for years, the trust had only seen normal contributions and small, appropriate withdrawals for test fees and application costs. Then, a few months earlier, small test transfers began to a new external account. After that, larger withdrawals followed in close succession. Angela pointed out that this new account was in Laura's name and also linked to Ryan. She had printouts showing the account holder information. The mediator studied the pages, then asked if we had any evidence to show that these transfers were not for education-related expenses. Maya slid forward a set of screenshots. On one side of each page were transaction dates and amounts. On the other side were social media posts from Laura's accounts, photos from a beach, dinners out, shopping trips, the new condo. Captions talked about investing in herself, building a new life, and taking bold risks. None of them mentioned tuition or school payments. The mediator reviewed them, then looked at Laura. She asked if Laura denied using trust funds to pay for those trips and purchases. Laura tried to say that money was all joint anyway, that she had a right to enjoy life after years of sacrifice. Her lawyer added that marriage created shared property and that I was trying to control her through money. Angela let them speak. Then she opened another tab and brought out email and message logs. Grace and Maya had saved these, messages where Laura referred to the college fund as easy seed money, joked that I would crunch the numbers and figure something out, and told a friend that she and Ryan had pulled what they needed before leaving. There was also the bank's login history, showing access from Laura's device late at night. The mediator's expression hardened slightly as she read. She asked how we had obtained the logs. Grace explained that she had seen suspicious alerts, checked the shared account, and then downloaded the full records. Her voice shook at first, but she kept going. She told the mediator about the day at the university office when the payment failed and how the staff member had to tell them the account was nearly empty. There was a long silence in the room after she finished. The mediator thanked her for speaking. She asked Grace and Maya one simple question: what they wanted, in practical terms, from this process. Grace said they wanted the trust restored as much as possible and protected from further misuse. Maya said they wanted their education secure and their mother removed from any financial control over their lives. Angela then introduced someone else into the conversation, not in person, but by written statement and a brief video call. Daniel from the bank. On the screen, framed in a small window, he confirmed that the bank's fraud and compliance team had reviewed the transfers from the education account. He explained that, due to the nature of the trust and the mismatch between the stated purpose and the pattern of withdrawals, the bank had flagged the external account. He stated that the account in Laura and Ryan's names was now frozen pending the outcome of this process, and that several recent transfers were in the process of being reversed back into the trust, subject to final approval. He added that any fees, penalties, or tax issues connected to the misuse would be the responsibility of the account holders, not the trust beneficiaries. As he spoke, I watched Ryan's face change. The easy confidence faded. His jaw tightened. He shifted in his chair and asked their lawyer something in a low voice. Laura stared at the documents like they were in a language she had never seen before. Angela was not finished. She turned to a thinner file and explained that years earlier, after my parents died, I had set up a small backup education trust funded with their inheritance. She reminded the mediator that Laura had never been listed as an agent on that one. She said that, once we saw the first suspicious transfers from the main trust, we had quietly moved that backup trust into a new structure with Grace and Maya as direct beneficiaries and with me as trustee. This had been done before Laura emptied the main account. The mediator asked for confirmation. Angela provided certified copies from the registry. The effect was simple. Even if not 1 cent of the stolen money came back, Grace and Maya's basic tuition would still be covered. The main trust, once the reversals were completed, would be used for additional costs and would be under my and the girls' joint oversight. Laura would have no role at all. Laura's lawyer tried to argue that this was unfair, that she was being cut out of her daughter's lives. Angela reminded him and the mediator that this was not about emotional access. It was about financial responsibility and the clear misuse of funds meant for the twins' future. The mediator agreed. She said that, based on the documents and the trust language, the appropriate outcome was clear. She proposed a written agreement. It stated that Laura would be removed as an agent from the education trust effective immediately, that full control would revert to me as trustee and to the girls as beneficiaries, that Laura and Ryan would bear any costs and liabilities tied to the misused funds, and that neither of them would have any claim to the backup trust or its assets. It also stated that if we chose, we could pursue further civil action for damages, although Angela indicated that, for now, our focus was on securing the education money. The mediator slid the draft across the table to Laura and her lawyer. She told them that, given the evidence, this was a reasonable and likely outcome even if the case went further. She advised them to consider it carefully. As they read, Laura's phone buzzed on the table. A notification flashed across the screen before she could silence it. It showed a payment declined at a restaurant and a message from the bank about restricted access to her account. Her face flushed. Ryan grabbed his own phone and started swiping quickly, his shoulders tense. Angela turned to me and asked quietly if I was comfortable signing the agreement as written. I looked at Grace and Maya. They both nodded. They did not look triumphant. They looked tired, but lighter, as if something heavy had been lifted off their backs. I picked up the pen and signed where Angela indicated. Then I slid the pages back to the mediator. The mediator marked them and set them aside. She said we were done. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped softly against the floor. I thanked the mediator and then turned to leave, the girls rising with me. Behind us, Laura and Ryan remained seated, staring at a table full of papers that had just turned their new life into a maze of debts and frozen accounts. In the hallway outside, the sound of the door closing was quiet but final. Grace slipped her arm through mine on one side, Maya on the other, and together we walked toward the exit without looking back.